How can you deal with the 3D, especially when it's not looking too good? So over the years, I've helped hundreds of people apply the law to get what they want, and this is one of the most commonly asked questions that I would get. Usually from people who have been trying to ignore the 3D for a while or deny the senses, often not seeing the results that they want, or they're being faced with a 3D that continuously triggers them or causes them to spiral. And my answer to them would often be, when you understand how the law works, you'll understand that the 3D is just a reflection of your past thoughts, expectations, beliefs, and imaginings. And of course, we all understand that on an intellectual level, but it's different to understand it on an emotional level. But when you understand it on an emotional level, the 3D is just not going to throw you off as much anymore. And I'll show you what I mean. So when people ask me, how do you deal with the 3D? Sometimes I'm tempted to ask them, how do you deal with watching a zombie movie? When you see those zombies on your TV screen or on your smartphone, do you think, oh no, the zombie apocalypse is finally happening? Do you think, oh geez, there's tiny little zombified people inside my TV or inside my smartphone that'll break out at any moment and bite me? Like, look at all this blood and gore. Look at all these people suffering. Oh no, it's just so stressful. No, of course you don't. You know that it's Hollywood. You know it's actors. You know it's fake blood. You know this was recorded somewhere, probably thousands of miles away from you, and beamed to your TV or downloaded to your smartphone. If I pull a caveman here from millions of years ago and show him that same zombie movie, he might freak out. He might actually hit the TV. Not you though, because you understand how movies work. You understand how television screens and smartphone screens work. So you're not fooled by this kind of thing. It's not something that you even have to cope with. And that's kind of like what the 3D is to me. Like when you understand that the 3D really is a time-delayed reflection of what you were previously doing mentally, there's not anything to deal with anymore. Here's another example. Let's say I go into my attic and I bring down an old newspaper that says the World Trade Center fell. Do you freak out and think that it's happening all over again? No, because you understand how newspapers work. You understand that this was from 2001. You understand that that was printed back then and that the newspaper just stayed, but it doesn't mean that this is happening again right now. Let's say I show you a mirror and you see yourself in a mirror. Do you think, oh God, it's my identical twin? She's stuck behind this strange glass wall, forced to mimic every action of mine? Like, no, you understand it's a mirror. You understand it reflects light into your eyeballs. You don't think like, oh God, I gotta get her outside. Like, how do I save her? If I were to pull that caveman from before and show him the mirror, they might freak out, but not you because you know how mirrors work. I don't have to ask you, how do you deal with seeing your weird doppelganger in the mirror? So how do I deal with the 3D? Same answer. I know how the 3D works. I've studied enough and I've seen enough to know deeply with conviction that the 3D is just a reflection of my inner mental environment and that nothing is set in stone and then all of it can be changed at any time. So there's absolutely no reason for me to freak out about it. So you're probably thinking, okay, Leanna, like good for you and all that. But how do I get to the point where the 3D doesn't faze me anymore and it's not something that I have to fight or deal with? I won't ask you blindly to have faith because you've probably been told that a million times. I know I needed more than just blind faith. And then just having blind faith is probably impossible for most people. I also won't tell you to just go experiment because even though that's good advice to give to someone who's just starting out in the law, if you're watching this video, you've probably been told that a million times, you probably already tried that. And like me, you probably want faith and proof as soon as possible. So first off, I do want to say there is a difference between knowing something intellectually and knowing something emotionally. To know something emotionally, you know it so deeply that it's just automatic and you never question it. It's kind of like skydiving. The first time you skydive, when you jump out of that plane, it's going to be really hard. Even though you might know the success rate and how safe it is, it's going to be really difficult for you to convince yourself to jump out of a plane. But if you've done it 2,000 times, by that time, you already know emotionally, this is safe. You know deeply like, oh, the backup parachute I've never had to use, or I packed my parachute really well. I know it's going to be safe. You'll just feel that safety more deeply, more emotionally. And it didn't have anything to do with the intellectual analysis of the safety and statistics of skydiving. So that deep emotional knowing and conviction comes from experience. So instead of telling you to just have blind faith, which by the way you should never accept from anyone, because all the best philosophers and teachers have always said, prove it to yourself when I'm telling you. Go out and look for the proof in my words. They never said blindly trust me. And instead of just telling you to go experiment, I'll instead tell you that you can go out and find proof to give you the confidence you need in the law now. If you just take the time to look for it and do a little research, which is what I did, and which is what I needed to really believe in the law, and recognize the 3D for what it was, which is just the law in action, just the mechanics of the law. Because when I first found out about the law, I thought, this is a really bold claim that you could just get what you want by changing your thoughts, okay, either these people are crazy, or they're morons who fell prey to confirmation bias, or they're just super desperate people who will do anything and believe anything to feel some semblance of control over their lives. It's either that, or this is real, and I owe it to myself to find proof for it, and I will only believe it if I see that proof. Because again, this is a really bold claim. And if it's true, there will be proof. And I should see it play out everywhere, because that's the nature of the law. It applies to everything, like the law of gravity. So I should see it happen in the lives of my friends, my family, my coworkers, famous people like celebrities or politicians. I should see it play out in every aspect of my life, but also in my own life. So if it is true, then my entire life and all the events in it should be chock full of proof in support of the law. And that's what I did. I tried to remember events from my life, big or small, and I tried to ask myself, okay, shortly before this event happened, what was my general attitude, my thoughts, my feelings, my assumptions, and my expectations before the event happened? Do they match with what actually ended up playing out? And without fail, every single time it would make sense. What I focused on, I got. Whatever I dwelled in, I would get. If I felt multiple emotions or multiple expectations, then whichever one I dwelled in either the most frequently or the most intensely is what I would end up getting. Whatever I expected, I got. And if I ended up having conflicting expectations, then I would manifest sort of like this halfway result that was sort of like the average of my expectations. So if I would have really intense expectations of a good outcome and I'd have like minor expectations of a small outcome, then usually it would average out so that I wouldn't get the ideal outcome, but it was like basically close to perfect. And again, I tried to remember this for all sorts of events. Big events, like getting into my dream school, small events, like just trivial, mundane, everyday things. So did I expect that I'd kind of do poorly on exam despite studying hard? Yep, and that's what I get. Did I pass an even harder test despite studying less, but where I had more confidence and conviction that I would ace it? Yeah, and so I would. Did I meet a person that just instantly know that he and I would get along really well? Yeah, and that's what would happen. Did I have a really crappy attitude about a certain trip and it end up sucking? Yep. Before winning a game or contest, did I have a feeling that I would win? Yeah. Or, conversely, did I feel that I would win, but I lost? But was I feeling really impoverished, and was I focusing on the opposite of abundance? Yes. Like, I would always find some reason in my 4D to account for the 3D that I got. So for that job offer that I was kind of moderately unqualified for on paper, but I knew that I would impress them in an interview, despite knowing that more qualified people than me would apply. Yep, and did I get the job? Yeah, things like that. And then I look at the lives of my friends. That friend who was always pessimistic and worried that she'd be annoying, yeah, she'd go on and meet a new friend group that she wanted to impress, and they would ask her for being annoying. Or that friend who is super smart and really talented, but always thinks that she's unworthy and overlooked. Yep, that's exactly what she ends up getting. The friend who expects everything in her life to go wrong gets also exactly that. Or the friend who's like less skilled, less qualified, less hardworking, but somehow always feels like things work out for them. Yeah, always has things work out well. And you can see this play out for celebrities too, especially the ones that are open enough to talk about manifesting and how they use the law for success. You can see how their success depended on their beliefs and expectations and what they focused on, not necessarily so much their looks or their talents. Because we've all seen some very beautiful, very talented people not hit it big. And we've all seen people who may not be the most talented singers or actors, maybe not the most attractive, end up succeeding really well. But you can just tell they have that confidence in themselves. And they end up talking about how they knew that they would succeed. They focused on succeeding. After a certain point, it just became overwhelming amounts of evidence in my own personal private life, in the lives of my friends, evidence that couldn't be fake because it was plain as day in front of me that this is how the law operates, that the 3D really is just a time-delayed reflection of what you were doing mentally before, what you were thinking, feeling, expecting, assuming, believing, and imagining or dwelling on. That's what you get. And when I was faced with seeing that much evidence over years of my life, I knew that I couldn't deny it anymore. And so when I would be looking at my current 3D, I'd also had to turn an honest lens to myself and say, okay, the 3D is not looking good, but what am I doing mentally? Like, What have I been focusing on? What have I been feeling dominantly? Bad? Good? What have I been expecting? Good or bad? What have I been assuming? What have I been believing about this other person or about the situation? And inevitably, I would be like, oh, well, there's my answer. That's why I'm getting this 3D that I'm getting. I don't have to be fazed by it. It doesn't have to be something that makes me panic. I haven't been doing the work that I expect the outcome for. And so the 3D just wouldn't faze me anymore. Instead, I started to see it as a sort of like guidance list, like a ruler, a metric for how well I'm doing. So I encourage you to try this. You can do it with yourself. You can do it with friends or family, people you know really well, people you know well enough to know what their belief system is, their general expectations and assumptions, what their inner mental reality tends to look like. And then compare that to the 3D that you see them experiencing, the events that happen to them. You will start to see these correlations. And depending on how old you are, this is over a decade of proof every single day, every single minor event across all these people that you know. One caveat though, when you're doing this, you might need to know a little more than just the fundamentals of the law. You're going to need to know enough to understand, okay, even if somebody had visualized this or expected this, why can it go wrong? You need to know what goes into manifesting an event, which is why I constantly stress, and I say this sentence repeatedly even though it's so long, you create your reality according to your beliefs, thoughts, feelings, expectations, and imaginings, because all those play a role. So you can't just say, okay, I did one, I didn't get my thing. Why not? Because you didn't account for all the other things that are working towards that are affecting that outcome. And unfortunately for this, there are no shortcuts. I knew this when I tried this experiment. I knew that I had to learn the law and I had to learn it properly. And as tempting as it was to take shortcuts, I knew I couldn't do that. I knew I couldn't say Neville Goddard's teachings are BS if I didn't read them. I mean, that would be like me saying quantum physics is bunk without studying it or knowing anything about it. I also knew that, unfortunately, spiritual teachings and abstract concepts can be easily distorted. It's like a game of telephone. Modern Christianity and modern Buddhism are a lot different than what Jesus and Gautama initially taught. And that's why I decided to go straight to source. I knew that inevitably, even if YouTubers were very well intentioned, that they might inadvertently change something. And I like to be really precise about things. And I was like, I'm just not going to take shortcuts. I'm going to go directly to source and read Neville Goddard's books myself. And this helped me a lot because it helped me work out a lot of seeming contradictions like I described before. For example, I did my manifestations. Why didn't it manifest? Or I visualized the method that I did and I still don't have my thing. Why not? And I could understand the answers to these questions from reading the source, from actually trying to understand the mechanics of how the law works. Because when you understand the mechanics, you know where to look to spot what went wrong. It's like any other skill. I know this is probably not what you want to hear, but it's what you need to hear. I'll give you an analogy. It's like if a friend comes to you and is like, hey, you told me that if I heated up bread and cheese in a pan that I can get a nice crispy grilled cheese. And I did that. I added some water to a pan, I submerged the bread and cheese, but it didn't brown. Like, what gives? It's not crispy at all. You know enough about cooking to know that if you just boil something, it's not going to get crispy, it's not going to get browned. If you were a real food nerd and you went out of the way to study the chemistry and physics of cooking, you would know proteins plus sugar plus high heat, really high heat, like 300 degrees Fahrenheit around thereabouts, is going to get you browning. You would know that that's called the Maillard reaction. And you would know that if you're going to boil something in water, water boils at 212 Fahrenheit. You are not going to get to 280 degrees or 320 degrees Fahrenheit, which is what you need for the Maillard reaction, for the browning. But you wouldn't know that if you didn't understand cooking. If you only learned the fundamentals of like, ooh, if you apply heat to food, it might brown, then you wouldn't understand what went wrong with your friend's recipe. And you wouldn't even need to get that advanced and crazy with the science. If you just have some experience with cooking or you know some of the fundamentals, then you would know how to get something crispy. You would know how to get something brown without even studying the chemistry or physics. And that's what I'm trying to tell you. If you just skip learning the fundamentals and you have no experience in something, then you're not going to understand why a piece of cooking advice or why a recipe didn't work. Just like you're not going to understand why a piece of law advice didn't work. You're not going to understand, okay, why did this technique not work? You would understand all the other factors at play. And of course, there are some people who just learn one technique and don't know the fundamentals, and they're just able to get success with the law really effortlessly. But I'm guessing you're not all those people if you're here watching a video on how to deal with this 3D. And that's okay. That other group of people who can seemingly manifest it so easily, it might be for a number of reasons. It might be that their assumption or belief system is more in line with what they wanted, so they didn't have to do any of the belief work. It might be that they didn't have any limiting beliefs blocked from them. But that's the thing, even though it worked out this time for them, it might not work out next time for them for a different belief, and they might still have to go down this route of learning what went wrong. Or maybe they're just the kind of people who naturally have such strong mental control that when you tell them, hey, don't let the 3Ds throw you off, they're just able to effortlessly listen. But if you can't do that, then you need to do a little bit more work. And that's okay, because the work that you have to do doesn't necessarily have to suck or be difficult. So I'll admit, reading initially sucked. Like, I knew that I had to read these books that were from Neville Goddard, but I didn't really enjoy it because his language is like really flowery. It feels almost like it's old English, and I didn't find it super fun, especially with the Bible quotes in it. And sometimes I would feel like his metaphorical interpretation of the Bible would be kind of a stretch. But I knew that I had to read this for myself. So what I did was I used these like psychological hacks I learned from these productivity tricks to get myself to do it, and I also gamified it for myself so that I would like consistently keep doing it. So what that looked like was I would set an alarm every day to read Neville Goddard, but I told myself I'd only have to read it for 5 minutes a day. That was like my goal, because I knew that all I have to do is make getting started the easiest step. So when an alarm would go off, I tell myself, okay, I will only make myself read it for 5 minutes, and after that, I'll consider it a success. Like, I'll consider it done for the day, because I knew that the hardest part was just getting started. And so if I just tell myself, yeah, just do it for 5 minutes and then you're good, I would do it. I'd actually do it. I lowered the stakes a lot. I told myself, you don't have to even understand it. You don't have to make it through a whole page or even a whole paragraph. Just sit down and read. And I would. And I sit down and read. Half the time after reading, I'd be like, you know what, this is actually kind of fun. Like, I'm kind of understanding it here. After the 5-minute time would go off, I'd be like, okay, I can just stop now or I can keep reading. But you know what, this isn't really that bad, so I'm going to keep reading. Now, that's a lot easier than telling myself, like, oh, I have to finish one chapter a day. I have to finish this book by the end of the week, because then it would just become a drag. And what I also did was I got like this paper calendar, like one of those free paper calendars. Like, I think I just bought one from a dollar store for like $5. But for every day that I read for 5 minutes, I would like cross out that box with like a really pretty green X or something like that. And so every day would come by and I'd say be on like an 8-day streak, and I wouldn't want to break that streak. You know, like, this is the gamification portion of it, where I'd be like, man, I've been so good, I've been doing so good, and I don't want to break my 8-day streak. All I have to do is set aside 5 minutes. Can I spare 5 minutes out of my busy schedule of like doom scrolling, like browsing social media? Like, yeah, I can. So I would do it. And before I knew it, I had all these books finished, and I started to actually enjoy it. Like, after a certain point, I understood enough of that it started to become really addicting and enjoyable. Like, I used to hate reading it, and now I actually like it. And it's making sense, because believe it or not, he just says mostly the same things over and over, but packaged differently so that different people from different perspectives can understand. And it got to the point where after I finished reading a lot of Neville Goddard books, I started reading the Seth books by Jane Roberts, and those were really enjoyable. Like, they were really hard, but they were really enjoyable. And I found myself trying to read for like 1 to 5 hours a day. Like, I found myself starting to like skip game nights with my friends and bail on video games even, and forgo watching Netflix just to read because I enjoyed it that much. Like, it started to get addicted because the material is so empowering and so freeing. And reading it every day has like this hypnotic effect where you're like impressing it deeply in your mind. And it got to the point where I was like, yeah, I really do create my reality. I can see now how so many things that I thought I was doing well, I wasn't doing well, and here's how I could fix it. Like, I started to understand deeply how the previous attempts at manifestation didn't work out so well. I could see where it didn't work out so well. I could start to see where I could improve with certain techniques like tailored to me based on what works for me and what resonates with me really deeply. It basically illuminated everything that I was doing wrong and affirmed me what I was doing right. And just the more that I read, the more I realized, yeah, it really is that simple. But here are the places where people would get tripped up. But the best aspect of it for me was just how empowering it felt and how freeing it was to be reminded, yes, you are fully the operant power of your reality. You really do create your reality. You don't have to be afraid of circumstances. You don't have to be afraid of a 3D. It is just a reflection that can be changed at any time. In fact, all that reading eventually taught me that you can use the 3D to your advantage, not just as something to be tolerated, but as something that you can look at and use to manifest better and faster. Seth, my all-time favorite source teacher, said that you don't have to ignore your reality, and that you shouldn't ignore your 3D reality, because your 3D is chock full of clues that can lead you to find out what about your manifestation are you doing wrong, and what you need to tweak to get it right. And this is one of my favorite techniques, and it's a big part of why the 3D doesn't faze me as much. Like, I don't even see it as something that I need to ignore. I see it as something to be used, one of the most valuable tools in our tool set. If you want to see me go into greater detail about how I use my 3D to become a better manifestor, then check out this video here. Otherwise, I hope you got something good out of this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!